punches here. We were talking a little bit beforehand, but today, very excited because I'm bringing on Professor Paul Chirik, who is a professor of chemistry at Princeton, and he has many, many other accolades that we'll get to in a little bit. But first things first is, and we were saying this a little bit beforehand, so I actually grew up in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I did my undergrad at Widener University. But you were also born in Philly, raised in Doylestown, though, quaint little town there, about 2 hours north on the 611 from Philly.
Oh, well, maybe 2 hours on a bad day, but it's not that far.
Not that, okay. Quaint little town there. Yeah. So I want to get your thoughts on the Eagles going to another Super Bowl this year. Were you there? Did you drive back from Princeton to join the parades for the NFC Championship game?
No, I did not. So that's a great question. I mean, you understand this. My dad actually used to work in King of Prussia when I was a kid growing up. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that was just a very memorable name for a town, right? Usually a town's named Springfield or something like that.
Right.
King of Prussia, like, this is in Germany, right? Why is it called King of Prussia?
I don't even know the history of Prussia, but like.
Yeah, right. And clearly the king. So I think this when you grow up in that area, sports, especially the Eagles, are a religion. And
if they're not doing well, the city, it's
there's a famous anecdote that I don't know if this is true anymore with online stuff, but it used to be true that the number of newspapers sold on Monday would like triple if the Eagles won or if they lost. I mean, people obviously don't want to read bad news, so they they wouldn't buy a newspaper if the Eagles lost a football game. Mm-hmm. But this is you're I'm guessing a bit younger than me, so this is like vindication, right? The last 5 years, right? The Eagles, we would get tormented in like the 90s, right? When I was in college, this is when Randall Cunningham was there, and they had this great defense, and they were always
the Cowboys doing well. Yep.
Yeah, and then something would happen, right? And they wouldn't get to then there was the Andy Reid time where they would always go to the championship game and never advance, and there was the one Super Bowl. But this year, actually, it just feels different, right?
Yeah.
They won in 2018, and maybe
I'll feel nervous going ahead because
always when you're a Philly sports fan. Yeah, I mean, every time you see Jalen Hurts run, you're just waiting for something to happen. I won't say it because I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah.
That tells you, right? Just because I can't even say it without even thinking it's going to somehow impact.
I was going to say, I see all these memes. I mean, people love trolling the Cowboys fans. So I always see these lists of like things in history that have been done since the Eagles or the Cowboys have been to like an NFC Championship game. It's just so funny. The one I recently saw was like, Jalen Hurts was born, played football, did he win the Heisman? I don't remember. He won.
Right.
He won the CFP. He did everything. And then now he's going to Super Bowl before the Cowboys have been back to the NFC Championship game. So it's been.
Right. And I'm sufficiently, again, old enough to remember the dynasty of the 90s with Emmitt Smith and Troy Aikman. And it was just
painful. I bet.
Painful. That is the right word. Painful. And, there's certain colleagues in chemistry. I'm talking about Mitch Smith in particular. He's a Texan. And, gives me grief about this. But hopefully the Eagles will win a few more and kind of keep them quiet for a while.
It'll certainly be very interesting because obviously like the whole Andy Reid, and then I think Patrick Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts. I'm not a huge football fan. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm definitely more of a soccer fan. But from what I've seen, I mean, I think Patrick Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts will be really cool.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be a good Super Bowl. I mean, there's certainly enough storylines there for reporters to fill web pages for the next 2 weeks over brothers playing each other, Andy Reid,
Do you follow like the Flyers or the Sixers?
Yeah. Especially the Phillies. So, I'm a big Phillies fan. When I was a kid, my dad and I would go to a game every summer. So he used to work for this local bank.
Okay.
And he would get tickets. And I don't know if the name Tug McGraw means anything to you. So Tug McGraw was the closer in 1980 when they won the World Series.
Oh, okay.
And maybe one of the coolest things that ever happened to me when I was a kid was, for some reason, I don't know how, my dad got assigned to drive Tug McGraw around. He was the spokesperson for the bank. And my dad got this like unbelievable job of being the guy that took Tug McGraw from point A to point B. And so I got to meet him a bunch. And when you're
crazy
9 years old and you get to meet somebody like this, I mean, it's not even almost like real, right?
Yeah,
like
it's
a superhero or something.
You remember this.
Super nice, super friendly. you know, he sadly died of brain cancer. And I don't know if you know this, his son is Tim McGraw,
the singer. What
the singer? Yeah. I'm not a country music person by any stretch, but
small world.
so
That's
there's all
crazy.
these weird connections. Yeah.
Right.
But,
Really
yeah,
cool.
that was true. So I follow all of them, and you know, my group gave me a Joel Embiid calendar for our holiday. Yeah, so I probably devote way too. I probably should be saying this publicly, but I devote probably too much time to all this kind of stuff, right? So
I think sports are a great avenue for just great outlets. Yeah, the Phillies, you know, they also had a really good season this year. I mean, they really had no business being in the playoffs, I think, but the fact that they went.
Well, I'm talking to someone who lives in Houston right now. So
yeah.
Move on to another topic.
I'm gonna be honest. Listen, I gotta set the record straight because I have a lot of people in Philly, like they're like shame me, but I don't really have a like. I love playing. I just like being a troll. So like when I'm in Houston, I'll say I'm from Philly, and like when the Phillies were winning like game 2, game 3, you know, I'm out there trolling the Houston Astro fans.
Right, but then they get no hit and whatever that was, game 5.
Yeah.
Think, oh man,
and it's like, well,
no, they scored like 12 runs the night before, and then the next night, right, they couldn't keep the ball in the ballpark, and then the next day they get no hit. So,
but then like I'll post like, oh, Astros win game 5 on like social media, and then I get the Philly fans start like coming at me. So I mean, for me it was just really funny. I was along for the ride. Right. But hopefully they just picked up Trey Turner though, so hopefully the Phillies.
Yeah, they look good for the season.
Yeah,
I mean,
run it back.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So all right, so yeah, you grew up in Doylestown, and then quaint little town up there. Then you went to Virginia Tech though to pursue your bachelor's degree.
Right.
You did work under Merola.
Joe Merola, yeah. That's kind of a funny story there.
Sure, yeah.
So the first question I get asked a lot is, how the heck did you end up at Virginia Tech? And maybe to seg from the last discussion we just had, this is pre-Michael Vick. So I showed up there in 1991, and you know, they didn't have the football team that they do now. And some people say, well, why does that matter? Why it matters is, when I would talk to people, when I would go back home and say, I go to Virginia Tech, they had no idea what it was. I mean, it was like, West Virginia, where is that place? And I say, no, it's in this beautiful town called Blacksburg. And people are like, oh, I never knew that. And then the football team got great. Now everybody knows about Virginia Tech. And so I ended up going there for I think almost 2 reasons. One, you know, I was 18 and a bit of a contrarian. So all of my friends in high school went to Penn State, and you know, I remember meeting with my guidance counselor, and I knew nothing about college. You know, my parents didn't really go to college. So this world that we live in now, where you have like a 10-year-old kid and they're thinking about where they're going to college, is like that's like another planet to me.
Right.
So I didn't really start my college process until I was probably almost a senior in the fall. And it was cheap. I mean, it was really cheap at the time. Out-of-state tuition was really inexpensive. Had a small scholarship to study chemistry. And I went there to visit and just fell in love with the place. Beautiful place in the you know, the mountains of Virginia. And and then how I ended up in Joe's lab was, I don't know if they still do this, but you would, as a chemistry major, I took intro chem. I took AP chem in high school, but then I was so
brutal course.
Whatever. I did fine on the exam, right? And I got 5 or whatever it is. And I could have skipped, but I just lacked so much confidence that I said, there's no way, I got to retake intro chem. So I did. And what the heck? And I'm glad I did, actually, because, you know, I tell people that a lot of life's chemistry problems are solved by introductory chemistry stuff. So it's really good to know that. And so I was in a majors class, and what we had were these kind of recitation sections. And it was cool because the faculty would come in to the recitation sections and then just talk about their research. And, you know, I would tease, there's a guy there named Jim Tanko, who's this organic chemist. And I would tease him because his research was really cool, but the requirements were like, you need to be in differential calculus and have an element named after you and like all this crazy stuff. And it's like, I can't do that. So Merola walks in and he starts talking about catalysis with iridium, these organometallic compounds. And I had never seen anything like it. And I was thinking, wow, this sounds really cool. Like, you know, one of the reasons why I like chemistry, especially back when I was young, was this idea of the periodic table, right? That there's all these different elements and they do different things. And there's like weird ones like iridium that you just don't see in your life. And he was studying that. And I thought that was cool. And then he got to the punchline, which was the requirements. Like, what was it going to take to join this guy's lab? And the requirement was eagerness to learn.
Fair
and
enough.
I said, I can do that. I'm well qualified for that. So I very nervously walked up to him and said, would you be interested in this freshman wanting to come join your lab? And he kind of blew me off. Now, he denies this. So if you ever talk to him, he's going to deny this. But this is, he would not remember this because he was the big shot and I was, nobody. I'm going to remember. And then about like 2 months went by, and I guess he probably had nobody else join his lab or something. And he comes up to me in the hallway and he said, are you still eager to learn, And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I got a place in his lab, and that's probably why I'm sitting here today, editor-in-chief of Organometallics, if you want to look at it that way. I mean, that started my time in organometallic chemistry, 18 years old, 19 years old, and now I'm almost 50, and that's where it all started.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that, because like I was undergrad, I was chemical engineering, and so, which is fine, but chemical engineering is a lot of like, I don't know, it's a lot of applications, and like
I tell my intro chem class, it's glorified plumbing.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of putting it. Honestly, I don't think my
no disrespect to plumbers, they do great work.
Yeah,
but
yeah, but like there was just like I wasn't really feeling the applications of it. And I know some professors, they'll do like carbon monoxide capture, like MOS, stuff like that. But it was like, I don't know. But then I reached out to Professor Lloyd Baston, who was my undergraduate advisor, like sophomore year, and I was like, well, he was doing like basically like introductory total synthesis, I guess in some case, like Diels-Alder and a microwave, like stuff like that. Like, and it was just like, I was like, wow, okay. He was like, what projects do you have? And like, I hopped on those projects, and it was just kind of, I was just in the lab by myself, basically just doing the stuff, because it was pretty cool. And then, now I'm here as a graduate student. So a lot of things I got to give to him, because he just kind of like gave me a project to work on in my free time. And,
Yeah,
so,
I tell my graduate students and postdocs this all the time when I go to them and say, hey, we have an undergrad who wants to join the lab, will you mentor them? And if they're not so excited at first, I usually remind them that somebody did that for us, right?
Yeah.
That's how we ended up where we are. And, it's really important to catch people when they're young and early in their science careers, right? To get them in the lab, because, we love what we do, right? And
right, yeah. We hope so, anyway.
Share it with other people. I think we still hope to turn them onto it, right?
Right. Yeah. We want to get. Yeah. I mean, science. I mean, especially the work that you do in sustainable chemistry. Like, we need as many people on this as we can. Like, I think we need.
Absolutely.
But I actually want to go back real quick. So, how did you like originally get into chemistry? Because, I hear
this is kind of not a good story for the, I'm not the chemistry set guy.
Sure.
That's like the story everyone wants to hear. I was blowing stuff up in my backyard. No. So I wanted to be a historian, actually.
Sure.
I still do love history, and thought I wanted to do that. And I never thought I would get a job, to be honest with you. And I was worried about that, and I knew it was a burden, for my family to send me to college. And I just had a hard time reconciling going there and potentially not getting, a reasonable job. And
sure.
I like chemistry. I mean, I for sure. I mean, it's obviously my life's passion now, but that was really it. And so it was kind of like a maybe 51-49, history and chemistry. And I thought I would get a job in chemistry. I always thought, when I was an undergrad, I probably would end up working at a company somewhere. That's because you don't know, right? I didn't know what a Ph.D. was. I didn't know any of that stuff. And so yeah, and I ended up minoring in history and had a great experience at Virginia Tech with the history department. So yeah.
Yeah, Virginia Tech is very. I mean, yeah, like you mentioned before. I mean, Virginia is. I mean, it's a beautiful state. It's very like low key.
Yeah, except around Charlottesville.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just kidding. If you're from Virginia Tech, things that go on in Charlottesville are not good. I remind Breck to know that all the time when I see him. So nothing of consequence ever comes from UVA.
So what were you doing in Merola's lab? Like, what were you? Because you mentioned
in Joe's lab. So he really, I think, pioneered the thoughts in my mind that, I probably didn't appreciate it at the time, but basically the way he would present the work was there are these metal catalysts, homogeneous catalysts that do really remarkable transformations, hydrogenations, things like that. And you need to use organic solvent to do it. And he was really big into trying to do organometallic chemistry in water.
Yep.
So
Very
that's really
admirable.
that's what I studied was could you take, if you try to dissolve Wilkinson's compound in water, it's just, I mean, first of all, right, you know this, you work in Brad's lab. I mean, what do we spend a lot of our time doing? Getting water out of things, right?
Yeah.
Working glove boxes and Schlenk lines and all that. And so it was to try to get catalysts to work in water. And it was interesting because I also had an internship that helped pay my way through college. I worked at a color company.
Nice.
In the summer, which is a whole nother hill of interesting stories. But and at the same time, it was kind of, I mean, this is the early 90s. I'm sure that seems like the Middle Ages to you, but
I'm a 90s kid. I'm born in
yeah,
99.
okay, yeah. So this is, a remarkable time. There was like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and
one of my favorite bands, by the way, Pearl Jam. Love Pearl Jam.
Classic rock, right? What was going on at the color company was we would make pigment dispersions, things that would go into car paints and stuff like that. And there was a huge movement in that industry at that time to get rid of volatile organic compounds. So not have, so when you make a colorant that you don't have some, tetrachloroethylene go into the atmosphere, right?
Right.
So that was going on to kind of pay the bills in the summer. And then Joe's lab was, don't use methylene chloride to do, a catalytic reaction. That all seemed like sustainable chemistry to me. I don't think we really called it that back then. I was just happy I could go in the lab and make some new compounds and stuff would work, and getting phosphorus NMR spectra and growing the first crystal where we're all enamored with our crystal structures, right? Yeah, really so cool. that was how it all started. So that's what I worked on. I worked on these iridium catalysts that you could chuck in water.
Yeah, and I actually want to ask you about this because of your maybe expertise in sustainability. Is one of the biggest problems in chemistry in general is always like workup and extractions, like cleaning up your compounds, isolating it, because we go through, I don't even want to know the number of how much organic waste we go through. So can you explain, like, what, obviously to the average person, like obviously doing chemistry in water would be better, but why can't we do things in water in general, especially with like organometallics? Like,
yeah, well, first I think is this often the sensitivity, organometallic chemistry. I think if you integrate it overall space, has been the chemistry of reducing compounds, right? Things that are highly reduced. So you start putting them in your protons, oxygen, right? They're gonna react in ways that you don't want. The field grew up a lot, trying to reduce inert molecules, right? N2, carbon monoxide, Renaissance, and CO2. But even the founders of the field were thinking about those things. So I think it just happens to be where the field came from. And that's an incompatibility. This question of water actually as a solvent for organometallic reactions, it's an interesting one. I think it hits on a really perplexing issue in sustainability, and that is there are things that sound sustainable on the surface, but when you actually analyze them, they turn out not to be. And I think it depends on the specific reaction. If doing a reaction in water is actually, getting rid of dirty water, especially if it's contaminated with a heavy metal, that can be really problematic.
Okay.
The kind of things that Joe's lab was really excited about was at the time, and I think some of this still goes on, there was a process, it's probably called something else now, called the Rhone-Poulenc hydroformylation process. And so what you could do is you'd put a rhodium catalyst in the aqueous layer, right? So it would swim around there. And then you would have your organic substrate that you're hydroformylating, think of your SEP funnel, right? And so the chemistry would happen at the interface. And then what you could do is just siphon off the organics off the top, and your catalyst is, effectively supported in the sense that it just stays, you don't have the dirty water problem, right? That you have this continuous flow of substrate turning into product, and you have your catalyst confined to this aqueous medium, and you have very little lost and all that kind of stuff. So that to me sounds really good. I think as we move forward, like you look at it, the way some of the pharma industry is going, right? They're doing chemistry on biological molecules, right? I mean, not just big, organic molecules, but like peptides, proteins. That's what drugs are starting to look like now. So you're going to have to learn how to do organometallic chemistry in water again. And you see some of that from some of the work that, people like Steve Buchwald have done, like trying to get cross couplings to work on polypeptides, on proteins.
Yeah. That's really, it's definitely it's an exciting field to say the least. I think there's so much work to be done. And as far as like organometallics, like cobalt, iron, copper, there's just so much to be done. And so it's a never ending field. So you're at Merola's lab. And when did you like was it a process to like go to graduate school? Like when did that kind of come into
Yeah,
play?
when did that come up? I think, again, I was working at this place in the summer, and I think I can say this, why not? I think, the big deal was like, I think the people at this company thought, okay, this guy shows up to work on time. He's not a danger to himself or others. We might want to keep him around. And they came to me maybe my junior year, and they said, if you want a job here, we'll pay you like $40,000. And I thought like, oh my gosh, this is like
a payday.
Jeff Bezos money, right?
Yeah.
This is big time stuff. And I remember going home to my parents and telling them, and they're like, yeah, that's great, but just, take the long view. Don't forget about the long view. And then I went and talked to Joe about it. And he's like, yeah, you can do that if that's what makes you happy, but you really should think about, you really like research, you're clearly into it.
Mm-hmm.
You think about going to graduate school. And I remember going in, and this is what the great thing about Virginia Tech and Joe's lab is that, I was a grad student, and the group at the time was or undergrad, and the group maybe had 3 or 4 grad students in it. So I could walk into his office just about any time and meet with him one-on-one. We'd look at data, work on, he let me give some talks and stuff and, all that. So he was really a great mentor. I mean, hands-on. He never went into the lab, thankfully, but in terms of being approachable, awesome. And so I remember him telling me, he's like, here's some names of people, and this is what you should think about doing. He was an MIT guy, so he worked with Dietmar Seifert. And, I was kind of enamored with MIT for a while, and thinking about going to work with Dick Schrock and do metathesis. That was all the rage back then. But then ultimately, I ended up at Caltech. So
yeah, that's very. You left the East Coast to go to the West Coast there. Yeah.
Which
so
was
how
a
did you?
big deal at the time for me.
Yeah.
It's just, I was telling this, I taught intro chem yesterday, and I was I called on someone, and the guy kind of like slunk down in his chair, and I said, don't feel bad. If that was me when I was 18, I might, I'd be crying, if a professor called on me, and like, I was people, with my personality now, I've got a big personality and all that kind of stuff. I was not like that when I was an undergrad. I was really unsure of myself, lacked a lot of confidence, especially in the academic world, because I just didn't know it. I didn't know any of this stuff. And to be honest, when I went on graduate visiting weekends, I was intimidated because there were all these other students from all these fancy pants places. And it was like, whoa, I had done research in this big shots lab or that big shots lab. And it's like, you're from Virginia, where, that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't know if I belong in this world. Right. So growing up, you probably did this too. Like vacation was like the Jersey Shore.
It's a beautiful place.
We would go to Wildwood. I mean, that's like what we did. And like my dad and I, we would do things like big trips we would do in the summer. We would go to like Hall of Fames. We would go to Cooperstown. We would go to Springfield, Massachusetts, go to the basketball one. Those were like the big trips. Yeah. I had never really gotten on an airplane before.
Right.
I mean, that sounds like nuts in this 2023, but
I can imagine though.
So like flying to California was like, putting me on like SpaceX and going to the space station. I mean, so
what was that conversation like? What was that conversation with your parents like? Were they like ready
do
for
it? Do
really?
it.
Okay.
Yeah. My mom used to tell me that when I was really small, like 3, 4 years old, and she would ask me what I would want to do. I would always say when I was little, I was going to go and live on the beach in California. I don't know why I would say that, but that's not why I went to Caltech though. I went to Caltech, and it was, I really applied there because of, Joe told me this is like one of the best places. It was, the heyday of John Bercaw and Bob Grubbs doing organometallic chemistry there.
Yep. And
I basically said, I'm going to take my spring break and go and just check it out. Go to California finally, right? They're going to pay for it. Oh my gosh, unbelievable. So I did that, and then I went to the campus and met John and met Grubbs and
I mean, I'm sure
and some other people at the time, and just it was cool. And I remember that, and I remember thinking to myself a lot, can I really do this? I want to do it, but can I really pick up and move to the other side of the country? And I say this to people in my lab all the time. I have now a visiting student, a visiting graduate student from Spain. And I just can't imagine myself at age 20, whatever, going to another country, kind of sight unseen, that kind of thing, and just doing it. I just was not that adventurous back then. And, but I did it, and it turned out okay.
it seems like you're fine now. So
it turned out fun.
I do want to talk to you about John Bercaw a little bit, because as I was like going through some of your publications and just reading about you before I had you on, is that, you studied the mechanism of metallocene-catalyzed olefin polymerization and hydrometallation. Now, I'm curious about your contributions to this because I'm pretty sure.
Are they minimal?
Huh?
No.
Well, no, not at all. Not at all. No. Because I think for a lot of people, obviously, like, unless you're not in the chemistry world, I mean, I think Ziegler-Natta type polymerizations are still used industrially to make polypropylene polymers.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere uses it. So in addition to that, because of John Bercaw and his group and colleagues, you can make syndiodactic, hemioisostatic, isostatic polymers. You can make it all basically because it was, his group, his colleagues that
and
really
rationally.
Yeah.
That I think is the key, is that, people had these maybe empirical relationships that you knew, and this is what really turned me on to it when I met with John. I had never seen someone who could take something. It's like, okay, you can take propylene, polymerize it over this little metallocene catalyst that had rings in a certain way. They had to be C2 symmetry, and it would make a hard plastic that you could then make a toothpaste cap out of. And I thought, man, that is unbelievably cool. And then he was asking all of these questions about why is it so selective, and regio, and antio selective, right? Or stereoselective. And the way he thought about doing experiments, I mean, these really intricate isotopic labeling experiments. And, back then, this is 95 now, this was really the peak of the metallocene revolution that was going on, and everybody, it's interesting, right? I think about this a lot. You go to ACS meetings or organometallic Gordon conferences, and there's kind of like there's epochs of, like, back in the 90s, most people were studying metallocene and olefin polymerization, and then there was like a post-metallocene era that Schrock and Dave McConville and lots of others got into, and then like there was kind of a cross-coupling age, that kind of thing. But this was the height of all that metallocene stuff, and John was not the cool thing that John was not doing was just making new catalysts. Like, he wasn't just randomly throwing us in the lab saying, okay, we got to make the next best catalyst for Dow or Exxon or something like that. It wasn't that. It was, maybe we will do that, but we're going to do it by understanding how systematically. And the big question at the time was, why was it at a 14 electron active species that you needed to do this? And it was, right before I got there, they had just done the experiments on the alpha agostic effect and how that went through. And to me, as a young grad student, I mean, the integration of just really sophisticated NMR experiments and isotopic labeling and the mechanism. And, he would always tell me this, and it sticks with me to this day. It's about asking the right questions, right? Like a research project, right? And you look at a molecule and say, how in the world, and I think we give the organic chemists way too much credit for this, right? If you say, what's one of the most enantioselective homogeneous catalyzed reactions, you might think it's a hydrogenation or something else. It's actually olefin polymerization. I mean, these things polymerize, and the catalysts are so active, right? They're doing 1 million enchangments in minutes, and it's like 99.99% EE. If you were this, the polymer people don't call it that, right? They don't call it EE, right? They call it a tacticity. So that was the big deal stuff. And then
now real quick, were you familiar with this metallocene stuff as an undergrad, or was this all like basically brand new to you?
I knew ferrocene, and so the story I tell people is we had to take inorganic lab as undergrads.
Sure.
And this is like old school stuff. I mean, this is going to make me sound like Mendeleev or something. So old. But we had a choice when you took this. It was a practical inorganic chemistry lab, and they said, if you make ferrocene, you get a C. If you make nickelocene, you get a B. If you make cobaltocene, you get an A, because that's the most air sensitive, hardest one to make. So
you're doing air sensitive stuff in like an undergraduate lab?
Yeah. It was small. It was only a few majors. This was Virginia Tech was great, right? We did all this kind of stuff. I mean, we were doing this, and before you ask, I made cobaltocene.
There you go.
I don't want to see it on Twitter that I got a C in inorganic lab. So yeah, I had not thought about, and maybe I think that was some of the enamor too of working with John, that I kind of spent my time doing late metal chemistry, right? It was square planar compounds, water, all that stuff, and here was this guy messing around with scandium.
Yeah.
And it's like, what the hell is that?
Yeah. Well, who cares? Like,
and then he had these like really cool vacuum lines, right? Not just a little Schlenk line. I mean, like these big, huge vacuum lines. And the techniques were really cool. And these molecules were so reactive and sensitive and stuff. And so that was kind of the history of it all.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because I mean, especially like coming into Houston as an undergrad, it's funny to me because like I came down to Houston like because I like the city. I didn't even know who the big names were here. Like I didn't know we had Olofs. I didn't know we had Ava. I didn't know we had Brad. So it's just funny. Like, I meet all these professors that are just sitting here who are doing really cool work, and you walk into their labs like, oh my god, like I had no idea what was what was
and
possible.
maybe this is to jump us into the next topic. So I found picking a graduate advisor pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it was easy was because I was so naive.
Right.
I didn't think about all the stuff that by the time then you become like a third, fourth year grad student. And it's like, yeah, I'm thinking about going into academia. I want to do a postdoc. And then you realize, oh man, to pick a postdoc advisor, now you know all these things that can go wrong.
Right.
So then you're way more specific about who you want to work with. And maybe have all these different boxes you want to tick and stuff.
Right.
And so the postdoc choice was a lot harder for me.
Sure. We did. I forget who you
did it with Kit at MIT.
Okay.
Kit Cummins at MIT. Yeah. Which was again, I think a really transformative scientific experience for me because again, it was, he was, if the world zigs, Kit zags. I mean, Kit is one of the most creative people in science that I've ever met. And I've always admired him about that. So, if everybody in the 90s was talking about olefin polymerization at an ACS meeting, there's one thing that Kit Cummins was not talking about. He would not be doing that. And so what he was doing at the time, so in my year of first year grad student, it was all the rage. I remember there was an undergrad at MIT named Catalina LaPlaza, and she had split nitrogen with this three coordinate molybdenum compound that Kit had. And so then I kind of knew when I went to Caltech that I probably was going to want to do a postdoc at MIT because it was like really a close decision when all that went down. And then I followed Kit's program really closely, and he came to Caltech when I was a grad student and gave a seminar. And again, it just sounded unbelievable. Was working at the time on all these early metal things, D0, F0, or D0, F0, oxidation state, everything diamagnetic. And this guy was showing, paramagnetic compounds. So you have to deuterate the ligand so you can see an NMR spectrum. Just thinking about things in a totally different way. And really, I think Kit's famous for a lot of things. I mean, he does, he's made, amazing molecules, cleave nitrogen. Now he's doing, unbelievably interesting main group stuff, making AS3P and all these unbelievable small molecules. But I think the thing that he did in the 90s and the early 2000s that really turned me on was he got, I think, the community, the organometallic, what I'll call the organometallic community, thinking about things with unpaired electrons and not being afraid of them. And I think, from 91 to 2000, before I did that, I worked either in iridium-1 chemistry, rhodium-3 chemistry. Like if you had something paramagnetic, that was like a failure, right? You didn't want that because you wanted to get these nice NMR spectra. And as trivial as that may sound, I think Kit taught me that you can do really amazing chemistry in the world of things that don't have NMR spectra, and don't be afraid of that. And like you said before, there's so much to do in iron and cobalt and copper chemistry. And I get asked all the time, the president of the university, when she hired me here at Princeton, said, I get it from a sustainability point of view, but why the heck would a chemist use palladium, not iron, to do a cross coupling, right? And it's like, well, it works. That's why. But someone from the outside, it's like, well, iron should be the metal of choice for everybody because that's like the one that the Greeks knew about, right? So why have chemists shied away from it? And it's because I think, we know how to make 18 electron things with carbonyls and CPs on them, but to put iron in a weak ligand field and then think about doing catalysis with it was not something that organometallic people thought about. Bioinorganic chemists did, but not us.
Yeah. So I definitely want to pick your brain about this a little bit because I know, like, especially like, I mean, the easy example I like to point to is obviously like cross coupling. So like, I mean, the using palladium catalyst to do cross coupling. I mean, that is, I mean, it won a Nobel Prize, and we could argue about who deserved it. Oh, my file is about to go off. Hang on 1 second. Let me turn this off real quick.
Hopefully not a real fire.
All right, the house is not on fire.
Okay,
We're good. We're good.
Well, that would be a memorable discussion. Would be,
my house is on fire, Paul. Please.
But my answer is really important, Nate, and you have to stay and listen. Flames are behind you.
Right.
There's that meme, right, with the dog, right?
Oh yeah, you're sitting down. Everything's great. He's like, everything's great. Everything's fine.
That's my podcast with
you. But no, like it's so. Like I was saying, I mean, the cross coupling, and like I said, we can argue about who deserved the Nobel Prize for cross coupling. But the point is that it was palladium, and probably arguably the biggest reason that palladium's used so much was 30 years ago, it wasn't that expensive, but also, the systems are just well defined. It's 2-0 electron cycle, catalytic cycle. It's just easy.
It works, and I think the thing about palladium cross coupling, and one of the reasons why we stayed away from cross coupling for a long time in our earth abundant metal catalysis program is the bar is so high. Right? For an sp2 cross coupling, I would talk to LC Campo at Merck and a guy named Matt Tudge, who preceded LC in the role of in the catalysis group, and we collaborated with him. And he would say things like, do you know why the Suzuki reaction is the most performed CC bond forming reaction? It's because it works on almost everything. I mean, they have these nasty molecules that have nitrogen heterocycles all over the place, free this, free that, halides. And the damn thing always works, and it works at really low loadings a lot of the time. Yep. You can use it on the bench, the preferred reagents, all that stuff. And so, I think this is an interesting discussion to have about a research topic. And when you choose one, and I'm not saying we did it right or wrong, but do you not go into a field at first because the bar's too high, right. and it gets into this, and Brad and I, still I think would argue about this. Do you need an iron catalyst to do sp2 if part per trillion palladium will do one? Right? The famous nature catalysis incident that happened, right?
Yep.
That's pretty remarkable. I mean, there was the dirty stir bars. We've had palladium cross couplings. Nanikov talks about this all the time, right?
Yeah.
The stir bars that are cross couple stuff. So, where I've, ultimately that always comes down to resources, meaning, do you have the money to do it? Do you have the people to do it? And, we've now ventured into the area, one, because I think we have a good problem to work on. And the other is that it gets more into what my interests are, which is the fundamental organometallic stuff. If you want to do iron cross coupling, do you have to use a 2-electron palladium-like cycle, or can you do something else? Mechanistically, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do electrophile activation? How are you going to do, not using the words that we always use, oxidative addition, transmethylation, right. Does it have to be that? And the answer is, I think pretty convincingly now, no.
Right.
You don't have to do it the way palladium does it. And now all of a sudden I'm in, right? So I don't know if I'm going to displace palladium at Merck or BMS or anywhere, but now it's a fun chemistry problem. Like, it's a really cool organometallic chemistry problem, right? And I think that's what has us going. And I think that's the most important thing for me in our group, is that there's all these, big time applications. You want to get rid of palladium, you want to do this, you want to do that, sustainability, the whole thing. But at the end of the day, it comes back to organometallic chemists sometimes don't know how to do X, right? And that is just like, to me, that's the ideal research project. When you have this fundamental organometallic chemistry question, how in the world do you make a CC bond at open shell iron, right? Along with the practical thing, like, whoa, if you can do that, now you're getting rid of, huge amounts of palladium in the pharmaceutical industry or wherever else it's used. And that has obvious impact. So it's like, that's like the perfect circle if you can pull it off.
I think for other people to understand too, is, as far as I understand, palladium, I think the problem with palladium is that, one, it is expensive. Like, I mean, 25 grams, right, is like, I don't know, what, $3,000, something like that. I don't know exactly, but
the price changes. That's one of the problems.
I was gonna say that's probably the bigger problem, is that I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of palladium deposits are in Russia. So there's a huge
Yeah,
there's a huge geopolitical problem with that. So, it'd be great if, we as scientists didn't have to rely on, Russia to get these, precious metals. Yeah. Or anyone. It'd be great. Anything, honestly, if, as I think it'd be better if we can get metals from America. Honestly, that would be the cheapest way to do it, is just get the metals from here, which I assume, actually don't really know the answer to this, but I assume America has iron deposits. It's everywhere.
We have a lot.
Everywhere.
Yeah, we make a lot of steel, so it's okay. You can get iron. Yeah.
So
that's a really fun thing to, this is more maybe a borderline between, my day job and then kind of a personal interest. Learning about where elements come from, and then there's another question that kind of is buried underneath that. Is it true that palladium comes from, South Africa and Russia? Yeah. And does it need to? Maybe that is the case for palladium, but for some other metals like cobalt, for example, if you want to go there, right? Cobalt is getting a bad name because of this issue in the Congo.
Did you see that? You see the episode with Joe Rogan? And
absolutely. Yeah. I made my group watch it. Yeah. I made my group watch it. I mean, it's like, it is the most heartbreaking thing to watch. I mean, it's unbelievable. But then the other question is, does cobalt need to come from the Congo? And I guess the question is what does the word need mean? The answer, I think, geologically is no.
Right.
It's not like cobalt is only in the Congo on planet Earth. It's in the United States, it's in Canada, it's in Australia. But then there's all kinds of other stuff that are well beyond the purview of us to deal with it. I used to start lectures with this. The second most difficult place to get a mining permit on the planet is the United States. Right. So if you have a choice, you're going to dig a hole in Minnesota to pull cobalt out, or you're going to go to the Congo. Well, it's like a lot of other things that go on in, globalization and economics and all that kind of stuff, is that you go where it's cheapest.
Right. That's
and I think, someone in your generation needs to start thinking about, what does the word cheapest mean? It doesn't just mean money. Right. And if you look at that video from that Joe Rogan thing, and you see those kids and you hear that, I don't know if you watched the part where he shows the video from his phone and you hear that clanging.
Yep.
When these people are digging the stuff up with their hands, that's just horrible. Right?
Yeah, I think, hopefully. And I hope that a lot of, scientists, I mean, obviously you're well-versed in current events, but hopefully a lot of other scientists are aware of like these issues too, and hopefully that we can make a voice for, start mining these
Yeah, and I think ultimately, though, at the end of the day, I think you do want to get away from cobalt for various reasons to go to iron, but that doesn't mean, I think, I wrestle with this daily, cobalt might not be perfect, but it doesn't mean you don't study it. I mean, first of all, I think we lose sight too much in 2023 in academia that we're academics. Right. We should be studying the fundamental chemistry of cobalt. I mean, that absolutely is a must. People study the fundamental chemistry of plutonium.
Right.
That is a must. Right.
Uranium,
uranium, everything. Yeah. I mean, we should be doing this stuff. This is what basic science is about. It's important. And I think we're too applied sometimes. Right. And we think about this because, you got to have your answer to everybody why it's so important. But, we've learned, and that's an interesting discussion, and I defer to my pharma colleagues for this, because some are like, cobalt's way better than palladium. We'll do a cobalt catalyzed reaction, 9 days a week compared to a palladium one.
Right.
And then people say, no, we don't want to do a cobalt catalyzed reaction. So it ultimately depends on what the reaction is, and is there another way to do it?
Right.
So if you got a cobalt reaction that nothing else can do, you're going to do it if it's really valuable. Right.
Yeah.
The 4 steps. Right.
Yeah. I think that is a good point you make, though, is that in academia, like in grad students, like we don't necessarily have a political say in how like these, we do have a say, but like, we're just that, though. We're the scientists. We're not necessarily the application. Right. So like, especially like polymer chemists, like we're trying to make new polymers, but like we're not taking the one to industry scale, right? Like we're not ones doing that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of times and a lot of the famous examples from organometallic chemistry that have made it into industry. I don't know that the people who started doing it, that was their goal. I mean, right. I mean, Suzuki did not study the Suzuki reaction. And, I think Negishi was very clear about this in interviews and Nobel lectures. I mean, Negishi in particular was talking about, he was interested in what elements would transmetallate.
Right.
Right. He wasn't thinking about Merck making Doravine or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
1979 when he was thinking about this. So and I think certainly Grubbs, Grubbs was on my committee, and Bob was I dare say a friend.
Oh wow,
That's crazy. I don't know if he would agree with that, but I considered him a friend. He wanted to understand the fundamentals of olefin metathesis, right? I mean, he and John were very close in that regard, right? Just amazing catalytic reactions. How do they work? And then his mechanistic work and that group just evolved it into something that's absolutely unbelievable, remarkable stuff. But I think these were basic science people,
right? Yeah, just some guys or just some people with some questions. There's nothing really more.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing really more to it.
The metallocene stuff, a lot of that grew out of, we're trying to mimic the heterogeneous catalyst, and we want to just learn some things about non-coordinating anions, olefin insertion, that kind of business. And all of a sudden now the organometallic quote model compounds are doing things that the heterogeneous stuff you can't do, right? With these stereochemical issues, for example. Yeah. And so yeah, I think you should try to work on something that matters, of course, but we can't, it's a linear combination, maybe, right? There's applied and then fundamental, and right. I think having the seesaw be one way or the other is probably, exclusively one way or the other is bad.
It is bad, yeah. So after some time at Cornell as a professor, you are now the Edward S. Sanford Professor of Chemistry at Princeton, which, sounds very important. Congratulations. I don't know what that means, but...
Thank you. Tell my kids that.
But you're also Editor-in-Chief for Organometallics. Now, on top of that, which I'd like to talk about too in a little bit, but
sure.
You and your group are some of the pioneers for earth-abundant transition metal catalysis, namely cobalt and iron, alkene, asymmetric alkene hydrogenation, cross-coupling, CH activation, the whole ordeal. But I'd like to ask you this first, because if I were a betting man, which I don't bet, but if I were in Vegas, I'd probably say differently. I think there's no way, as a kid just from Doylestown, PA, you could see where you are now. So, can
absolutely.
you kind of believe how far you've come? And I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a dream. I think it's real life. When I have to answer all my emails every day, I get a reminder that this is real life, right?
Yeah.
No, I was obviously being completely, hopefully you believe me, that I was being completely honest that, growing up, I did not know what a Princeton professor was. I didn't know about, even if you would have asked me 3 years in, I was telling somebody this the other day. 3 years in, when I was at Cornell, we started seeing the glimpses of something interesting with iron. If you would have told me that however long later, 15 years later, I'd be working with, Merck and Firmenich and, at one point we're doing a lot of stuff with ExxonMobil. I mean, to see how that had grown into all these different areas and how many other people work in it now. I mean, I never would have guessed that. That's not what I did not, I don't have this, I didn't have this grand vision in 2003 of, upending catalysis.
Yeah, sure.
It was fundamental. It was really fundamental where it came from. It was at a Gordon conference. First Gordon conference I ever went to. I was sitting in the back row. And I will never tell you who it was. Somebody was giving a talk that I was not that interested in, and just started thinking about stuff. It's like, whoa, I'm sitting in this amazing job at Cornell. I've got these really good graduate students. How can we really make a difference? And I came back and went to Suzanne Bart and I asked her a simple question. Isn't there an iron catalyst that does what Wilkinson's compound does? And this got really scary for us for a long time because we thought there must be, and we're just not searching the literature well enough, right? It's one of these things where there must be, somebody wrote a paper, and then you find little glimpses of things here and there. Mark Wrighton had done some stuff, and some industrial groups had done some stuff with iron carbonyl and things like that, but there really wasn't that. And then once we
do you mind explaining Wilkinson's catalyst real quick for anyone that's really not chemistry, or even like they are on chemistry, but they're not an organic chemist, real quick?
Right. So Wilkinson's compound is a rhodium compound, square planar rhodium compound that, in my mind, really kind of transitioned organometallic chemistry away from structural curiosities like ferrocene and cool bonding modes to, whoa, we can now make homogeneous catalysts that do what heterogeneous catalysts do.
Mhm.
And then you've got the extra benefit of you can change the ligands rationally. You can, this is Brad Caro would teach me all these things, right? I mean, Coleman electronic parameter, many discussions about that. But you can, make the metal more electron rich. You can make it more electron poor. You can put chiral environments around the metal, right? Now start doing an anti-selective thing. So that's what, I think in my mind, Wilkinson's catalyst did, is it made that transition along with some other compounds too. But it relied on rhodium, right? It relied on rhodium, and then I think it started with this really fundamental question, right? Why can't iron do what rhodium can do? And it gets to what I said to you before. It then all of a sudden, you have this mix in a project of, there's a very, very fundamental chemistry question. How in the world do I get iron to do an oxidative addition of H2? How in the world do I get iron to do a CH activation? All the Bergman, CP star iridium stuff. How in the world does iron do that? There were hints in the literature, and then how do you turn it over? Right? All of a sudden you got spin states in there and stuff. And then, you talk to some colleagues like Jeff Coates and Dave Collum, and, Dave would say to me, yeah, I consulted Pfizer and I talked to the Pfizer people, and they say, yeah, if you could come up with iron catalysts instead of palladium and rhodium, that I think there'd be interest in the pharmaceutical industry on that. And
absolutely, yeah.
And so that said, okay, we should keep going. And then, we submitted a few NIH grants, and we're told this was dumb.
What'd they say? What'd they say? Or was your submission just bad?
The first review I ever got on a JAX submission, the first time we ever submitted the iron stuff, we submitted as a communication, and put my editor hat on for a little bit. Most of the times when people get papers rejected, a lot of the times when people get papers rejected, they're just poorly presented. And I don't mean like the sentences and stuff. I mean, maybe I was a little too Northeast Philly when I wrote the paper, but only you would get it.
No,
right?
screw them, bro.
No, but it was just, it wasn't well presented in terms of, we had too many different things going on, and it just didn't have a nice message. And I think it confused some of the reviewers. But one of the reviewers notably said, why would you want an iron catalyst to do this? Palladium on carbon. I mean, this is like the most boring hydrogenations of all time. We were hydrogenating cyclohexene to cyclohexane, right? And then other reviewers had gotten it as, whoa, this guy's doing something, right? It just might be dumb in terms of like, everything hydrogenates those olefins that are in this paper, but it's what he's doing it with, and how in the world is this happening and stuff. And so Bill Jones was the associate editor at JAX at the time, and I saw him at a Gordon conference, and he pulled me aside and he gave me some advice. He said, that paper is going to be really important. You got to write it right. You got to go back and do it. And so we turned it into a full paper, and it got accepted, and it's, 700 times cited or something like that. It's one of the, it's like, that's the one, right? That's the paper. Right. And then, then you find out that the ligand on there is, it's called redox active, meaning there's electrons going on the ligand. And then you think, oh my gosh, what in the world have I gotten myself into? And then I started to collaborate with a guy named Carl Wiechart, who was like the world leader in redox active ligands at the time, but never really thought about it in terms of doing, hydrogenation catalysis or cross-coupling or any of that. And so, we had a couple of grants together, and kind of the rest was history.
Yeah, that's really cool, because I think a lot of people that maybe aren't familiar too, it's some crazy percentage of pharmaceutical industry utilize hydrogenations. Isn't it? It's like some crazy number, like it's used all the time.
Well, an antioselective, so it's half the chiral material in pharma comes from an asymmetric hydrogen. Half. So that's a
crazy.
Lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. So where is the state of like that project now? Like, what is like one is obviously because CH activation, cross coupling, and then now
hydrogen. We do all so you're asking specifically about hydrogen?
Yeah, hydrogenations. Yeah.
So two fronts there. One is I somewhat tongue in cheek say the great part about doing catalysis is you always have a job. And what I mean by that is you can always make a catalyst that's more active, more selective, cheaper to make, easier to use, right? So, it's like asymptotically approaching perfection. You never get there. And so in the asymmetric hydride space, we're working a lot, obviously, with cobalt. We're searching. So one of the things that we I've struggled with for a long time is catalyst formation. So, the underappreciated part of the rhodium catalysis is, you can do high throughput screening by taking a good precursor with a phosphine, generating your catalyst, screening 400 catalysts in an afternoon, and doing that with cobalt or iron is not easy. And so the beauty is we've learned with cobalt how to do it with what we call neutral cobalt, cobalt 0, cobalt 2. We have high throughput methods for that. Those catalysts are really still shining today. I was on a call this morning where these are being used to hydrogenate alkenes asymmetrically that rhodium won't. Rhodium gets killed by them. These are parts of molecules that may turn into drugs. So it's really exciting. Same issues apply, though. Got to get the catalyst loading way down.
Right.
People other than my group have to be able to make the catalyst, in a plant somewhere. Happens. But the space where is really cool is that you can also make catalysts that are cobalt 1 with a plus charge like rhodium. So we now have catalysts that can be in one oxidation state or another. You can't do that with a precious metal that I know of. You don't have, palladium 1 catalysts, palladium 2 catalysts, and palladium 3 and they're all different, right? So that's cool. And then in that space too, we're trying to get back to iron, right? I mean, again, now we're back to the fundamental question: how in the world do you do this with iron?
I want to pick your brain about that a little bit. Like, so what is kind of your thought process? What's your approach to this? Because I'm actually not as familiar with cobalt, but definitely with iron, I'm familiar with. Is it can enter? I guess we can have a discussion about. We don't have to go there, but what is an oxidation state? But iron can enter different oxidation states between 2 electrons, 1 electron, spin crossover. So are you like trying to understand that to like that aspect of the metal to help with your chemistry, or are you kind of high throughput everything?
No, we don't. No, we don't high throughput that. Usually the high throughput, most of the high throughput stuff we do is in collaboration. So the high throughput stuff we do is in collaboration with Merck for the hydrogen space, and then the cross coupling space we do some of it with BMS. But that work is, it's not as much catalyst discovery often as catalyst optimization. So a lot of the discovery comes from us, and then it just saves you time if you can make 50 ligands or there's whatever. The iron question is, at least in the cycloaddition chemistry that we do, the fact that there are spin crossover compounds and all these complicated electronic structures, that actually turns out to be the cool part. And that turns out to be why you can cyclodimerize 2 olefins to make a cyclobutane, right? We think. I mean, it's very hard to prove, by the way, but all the data right now suggests that these unusual electronic structures, redox active ligands, all that stuff, do these really unusual. It's this chemically recyclable polyolefin that we made, that kind of stuff. So there, having all this complexity, we think, is an advantage. In the hydrogenation space, we have yet to get anything to really be at the level of rhodium or cobalt. A cobalt, in my mind, I think the one of the biggest compliments I've ever gotten is, it's the Merck team looks at cobalt now. Like they do, when they have a project, they look at cobalt. Maybe not as often as rhodium, but they're starting to look, right. People are starting to say, okay, cobalt's part of the catalyst space now. Iron, no way. Nobody knows what that is. I didn't say nobody, but not that I've seen in the literature, and we certainly don't.
What do you think? What do you think the apprehension is? Is it just simply because we just don't
understand? It's not apprehension. I think it's just we haven't solved it.
Okay.
We try.
But what do you? So, good question to pick your brain about then is like what is going wrong then? Like what about iron is just not clicking?
So the problem is, I don't want to offend any of my former students because that we do have probably one of the most active olefin hydrogenation catalysts of all time, and it's iron. It's iron based. There's an ACS catalysis paper. The problem is that the ligand that you need to get there is this complicated pincer ligand, and to make and this is an interesting sort of philosophical discussion. So when we go to Merck and we talk about cobalt catalysis, we tap into their 200 phosphine library. Right. So they got the library. It's all there. Now, somebody made all those probably over 30 years. Right. When you then go to the iron ligands that work, these pincers, it takes like, a week and a half to make one, and then you have to get it on the iron, and that's a chore. So it's like the whole synthetic bottleneck. So yeah, we could do it. And if I ran a group of 100, I wouldn't want ever to do that. But, I think if you just set an army of people on it, it's, enough, but that's not practical. Right. And the compounds are super hard to make. They're iron dinitrogen compounds. I mean, they're like wickedly air sensitive and all of that business. So, cobalt works in methanol, right? So cobalt works in air and methanol and all that stuff. So it's like great, but iron, we're so far away from that. And so right now it looks like iron is iron 0,2 in a really strong ligand field. That works. But I don't know that we as an organometallic chemist have the right ligands there yet.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe if, in 40 years, somebody builds up the NHC pincer ligand library, it'll, somebody will look at this video and say he was way off the mark. Probably like most of this, but
I think that's a very well, like we keep saying, it's very there's a lot of work to be done though.
So the last thing I'll answer you about hydrogen too, that I don't want to say it's just olefin. One of the things that we're super into now is arene hydrogenation and heterohydrogenation. So we're back doing, early metal chemistry, molybdenum chemistry, and we're doing asymmetric. So the cool thing is again, fundamental questions. When you take organometallic chemistry, you learn a lot about how asymmetric hydrogenation works, the classic Halpern experiments and Clark-Landis and all of this business about major, minor, Curtin Hammett. If I were to ask, what about arene hydrogenation, benzene hydrogenation? How does that work? What are good mechanisms for that? What are the, you don't know, right? And you talk to people in pharma, and this is an incredibly powerful transformation if you can do it, because you can Suzuki your daylights out, make flat molecules, and then hydrogenate them, set many, many stereocenters, and then you've got three-dimensionality using chemistry you know how to do. And it's just the hydrogenation part's the hard part. So we're working. I mean, this is really exciting to me, that we're working on this, and it's been a lot of fun. So we've got metal hydrides that insert arenes. I mean, that's crazy, right? You make a molybdenum hydride and it inserts benzene. Like it does ethylene. I mean, that's like crazy, right?
I was looking at your most recent publications. It's this molybdenum catalyzed arene hydrogenation, which is
it's really
it sounds really cool. I mean, I hope it works. I hope it works.
It is. How much is going to work, but and no, it's something that's really exciting for us because again, it's that fundamental in the apply, right? If you pull it off and you can do it with nitrogen heterocycles and pyridines and stuff, that's immensely powerful to medicinal and pharmaceutical chemists.
The last thing I want to talk to you about is like being the editor-in-chief at Organometallics. So I haven't had a chance to read your scope of 2023, which you published recently. But how is it balancing, one, your family, two, your research lab, and then three, Organometallics, and teaching on top of that too? Like, how do you manage to do it all?
When you say it that way, it sounds a little sad, but the people in my lab will laugh if they watch this, because they hear me say this. Sometimes people will reach out to me and say, I need you to do this by tomorrow. I need you to write me a recommendation letter by tomorrow. And when I get frustrated, I always say the same thing. Does everyone think I sit in my office and just stare out the window? Like, I'm waiting for work to come in. I have nothing to do. Don't ask Brad that question, because he used to have an office right next to mine. So maybe he'll tell you I do stare out the window. No, it's hard to stay on top of things. You're getting onto something really personal, maybe. You do so many things, and sometimes you feel like you're not good at any of them. You know what I mean? You spread yourself too thin. I like all of them, obviously. I mean, I would never do something that I don't like to do. I mean, honestly, the day job has a lot of elements to it that I wish would go away. The faculty position. I mean, this administrative bloat that we have now in academia is just like, I don't remember Bercaw doing all this stuff. I mean, maybe he did and I just didn't see it. But like email and like this instant gratification, or what, it used to be like when I was an assistant professor, I could tell somebody like, hey, I'm going to the Gordon conference in Galveston. Like, and that was kind of code word for like, don't bother me for a week. And now
Mm.
it's like, what, Galveston doesn't have Wi-Fi? You know, it's like you can still take a Zoom meeting at lunch, can't you? And it's like that's changed, and that's sad for academia.
Mhm.
You know, it's just all this, like you
It's
get
like
pulled to
pedal
all
to
this
metal.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, pedal to the metal, and you know, you just don't do as much science as you would hope. I mean,
Right.
maybe others, you know, colleagues, maybe Byers when he was on here, maybe he's got it figured out. I don't. And I got a lot of help here. I mean, I have great people that work with me and all that, especially at Organometallics. I have an amazing team of people. That actually is a lot of fun. I
Mhm.
would say the work I do at Organometallics, very little of it is like administrative bloat. The
Yeah.
ACS does a great job with that. I handle the papers, you know, and assign them to the associate editors and think about the bigger picture for the journal and that kind of stuff. So that actually, the organometallics part, believe it or not, is one of the more scientific aspects of my life.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, certainly more than my job at Princeton, believe it or not. If you looked at it percentage wise, you know,
Mhm.
I mean, I spend more time dealing with who knows what here.
Mhm.
You know, it's just crazy. But
So from yourself, so what are like the outlooks for organometallics? Like what are you hoping to bring like
that's a
moving
great
forward?
question. So scientific publishing has gotten complicated
Yeah.
in the last decade. You know, I've been at the journal since 2015, and even in that time, it's been completely upside down. You know, and I tell people this all the time. I mean, publishing itself, everything from, you know, the New York Times to the Economist to organometallics is undergoing a revolution. And I think, like many revolutions, you don't know how it's going to end.
Mm.
And maybe I'll end up in the guillotine. I don't know, but um, you know, open access is a thing. It's an inevitability. It's
Right.
thermodynamic. It's going to happen, and I don't know that we, meaning the scientific community, know how we're going to transition. We know, I think it's like, you know, it's like a reaction. Like, you know, the products and you know where
Right.
you are, but it's like you got to figure out how you're going to get there.
Right.
What's the mechanism? And we don't. And ACS is working on this along with all the other big publishers. But as that transition happens, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yep.
And I think a challenge for the journal, that's a little bit of it. But the other is, you know, when I was in graduate school and you work with John, unless something extraordinary happened, you were either going to publish your paper in JAX or organometallics.
Mhm.
Like that's the way it was in the group. If it was great, you published it in JAX, and if it was really good, you publish, you know, just more specialized, you publish in organometallics. I mean, there wasn't ACS catalysis, there wasn't Nature catalysis. Maybe he would publish in Angewandte, but like most American groups didn't do that at the time. There
Yeah.
was no chemical science back then, you know, the journal. So there's,
Yep.
you know, I think when I started at ACS, I think there were 51 journals. Now there are 80. So
Yeah.
right there, you know, if you look at the number of titles that have come up in the past, whatever year, 8 years, it's a lot. Are there that many more researchers, right? And especially
Mm.
after the COVID times, you know, research productivity probably has gone down. So a huge problem for the journal, maybe I shouldn't say problem, but the opportunity for organometallics, and this is important, I think it's one of the most important things I can say to you today, is I firmly believe that the field of organometallic chemistry is as strong as it's ever been.
Mm.
And you go to more and more places, meaning you look at organic methods groups, you look at materials groups, they're all doing organometallic chemistry. They may not want to say it, but they are, right? I
Mhm.
mean, the total synthesis groups are now doing methods, and they're all using palladium catalysis or iron catalysis or whatever, you know, photoredox is all, you know, metal chemistry. And the journal, I don't think, has captured all of that. You know, I think the field
Mm.
has grown and the borders of organometallic chemistry have grown, and the journal has not done that. You know,
Mm.
and that's the real challenge, is how do you get the people doing all these different things that don't maybe identify with, because they think the journal is about, you know, CP compounds and crystal structures. And
Right.
that's what that editorial is about, is it's not that. I mean, we love that, and it always will be part of that. And that's what made organometallic chemistry and the journal great.
Mhm.
But there's so much more. And, you know, one of the things that's in the editorial is you don't need to have an isolated metal carbon bond to publish a paper in organometallics. You don't need an elemental analysis with a crystal structure to publish in organometallics. You don't. And
Yeah.
I think that's turned off a lot of people.
How do you mean? Like
Because
people
they
want to
had
do
that
that?
perception. There was a
Oh.
perception for years that, like, if I don't have a crystal structure and elemental analysis, and, like, you know, the focus of the paper is not the structure of the organometallic compound,
Mhm.
it's not appropriate for the journal. And
I
that's
see.
just, that's not true. And if you have a great catalytic method, and one of the things the editorial talks about is, so we, you know, back to Byers. he does a lot of, he's been a real pioneer in the chemistry of polymerizing lactide.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those, I use that as an example in the editorial, that a lot of those polymerizations are done with main group compounds that aren't organometallic. And the propagating species are metal alkoxides. So there's really no metal carbon bonds. But when you actually read the paper, it reads like an olefin polymerization paper, so it's like the same concepts.
Right.
And the same kind of kinetics, tacticity, and active species, and catalyst lifetime, all the things that organometallic chemists care about. So we publish those.
Yeah.
And we want to publish those. But it's not, if you want to be like IUPAC judge with your gavel and say that's not really an organometallic compound, you're right. But the journal will publish that. So that's really what the story is. And then there's a little bit at the end of the editorial about scope, substrate scope. I don't know, Marissa Kozlowski led this at OrgLed about the 20 substrates. I'm a firm believer in that. You don't need to publish 100 substrates in a paper.
I know when we have our lit survey with Brad, and he's like, if you bring up more than like 20 substrates, I'm like, we're shutting this down. And I have a good laugh about it, because it's like,
you want to have, and Marissa articulates this really well, that you want to have diversity. You want to have each substrate teach you something. Mm-hmm. And putting an isopropyl group and turning it into isobutyl group 7 carbons away from where the action's at usually doesn't tell you that, right?
Yeah. Another gripe, a really quick gripe that I have with journals in general is the idea of like, whatever happened to just like a comm paper where it was like 3 pages long and it was like, here's what we did. Oh my God.
So I need you to Google something after this. You need to Google organometallics flash communication.
Okay.
I don't know what year this was, but we went through this. It was before the pandemic. I think we define modern times that way, before and after the pandemic.
I don't know. It feels that way.
Yeah,
it feels that way.
But certainly before the pandemic, we decided at Organometallics, I'm an old school guy in a lot of sense, that the 2-page communication needs to come back.
Yes, it does.
And I wrote an editorial on this called Communicating Science. I remember it because it has just a short and kind of hopefully catchy title. But the idea is to have this 2-page communication come back, and that, I was talking about this the other day. There's a paper by a guy named Masuda in Angewandte Chemie, and he takes these molybdenum dinitrogen compounds. This paper's from 2019. Molybdenum dinitrogen compounds that were made by Chat and others in the 70s. These things were like famous dinitrogen compounds, but they never actually did much in terms of like making ammonia and stuff. You could add acid and things, but this guy in 2019 and his group figures out you can add ferrocenium and oxidize this compound by 1 electron, and it cleaves nitrogen and makes a molybdenum nitride. This is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. This is one of the most brilliant reactions that I have seen in like the last 5 years. And my question is, how in the world do you publish? You got one reaction and it's awesome. But I think like you send it to some places and there's an expectation for a 4-page communication. Now all of a sudden you're doing a mechanistic study, you're doing DFT that may or may not be relevant to anything. And it's like, that's not what science should be about, right? He should be able to publish, and his group should be able to publish that and have it go through review really fast, because you don't have to scrutinize the thing. It's like, well, it's a cool reaction. He's got what he says he has. It's characterized the right way. Let's go. And so we tried to bring that back. And so we have these things, and we encourage people to submit 2-page comms. The uptake hasn't been as much as I'd hoped. I was hoping to see, we got a few, mostly from the main group community.
Yeah.
But, I'm a huge, it's funny because I haven't read I shouldn't say this, but I haven't read the author guidelines for JAX in a little while. I don't think it's a requirement that you publish a 4-page communication, right? I think it says up to.
Right.
Right. But people do that. And then what it does is the reviewers then say, you could, I think Eric Herrera would say, yeah, if you have a cool thing, you can publish it in JAX. But then the reviewers are going to say, well, you still got 2 pages to go here, Aiden. I want to see X, Y, and Z. And in the old days, you would say, sorry, I'm at the page limit. I'm going to write a full paper to follow up and answer all these questions. But I want to get this cool result out now because it mattered. And so I don't know.
Yeah, whatever happened. Where did the philosophy change on that? Because it's like, it makes sense to me. It's like, you did something cool. I'm gonna polish about it. I don't have all the answers yet, but I will have.
I think it's like the life of this is not me speaking as an expert, but this is just my observation. Is that I think it was well intentioned, and it's just unintended consequences. So I think what happened was in the early 2000s, I think this is when Peter Stang was there, graphics got better, right? And getting, you weren't solving a crystal structure in a month. You were solving it in an afternoon. People had just more stuff in their papers. So they said, okay, we're going to go to 3 pages. And then 3 pages turned to 4. And then the community gets a hold of that. And then 4 pages really becomes now an abstract for 150-page supporting information. That's really the paper that nobody's really reading. And so it's just kind of like, things just go off the rails. And now the question that I ask is, the old days was that a communication was meant to be rapid communication of science, meaning that you sent it in and you got something hot, and the implicit message to people was, we're not doing all the mechanism right now. We're not doing everything. We just want to get this out because it's so cool. We're communicating it, right? Now with the Chem Archive, like, I don't know.
How can you compete with that?
Right. Like, you can put all kinds of stuff up on the Chem Archive, like, right away, and then do things to it. So again, this is what hopefully this brings us a little bit full circle in that, publication landscape is changing. And, I can sit here in my, rocking chair and shake my cane and say, it's not like it used to be. It's not going back, and you got to embrace it.
Right.
And learn how to operate in the environment. And I think science is better for it. I mean, I think the Chem Archive has been a great thing. I think it's a great thing for science. And, I think, like anybody, you were skeptical in the beginning.
Sure.
It's new, right? You're successful in the old way. Why would you want to do a new way? But I think it's taken off. It's done a great thing, and people love it. I think Brad puts a lot of stuff up there. I put stuff up there occasionally. I mostly forget. It's like,
like you mentioned before, though, like you mentioned before, I mean, obviously, we're in such a technology age. There's so many open source coding, open source, like, computational stuff. So it's like, obviously the next step is going to be open source, like, just
NMR, everything.
Everything.
Right. I mean, you should be able to, and publishers are talking about this, like, you have something on the archive, and I want to look at your NMR spectrum. I should be able to get the FID and put it on my own, MNOVA or whatever it is, and look at it and blow up the peaks and look for coupling constants or impurities or whatever I want. And we're there. I mean, the old days, in grad school, I remember I used to get on the photocopier and have to photocopy the spectrum, put it in the SI, right?
Can't imagine.
And walk uphill both ways to work and all that stuff. It's neat. But so I think all that's changed, and publishing has to change with it. The supporting information has just grown because data is just that much easier to get and share. Right.
All right, Professor Chirik, I want to thank you so much for coming on.
This was great. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Hopefully, bring on more guests. And I actually reach out to Marissa Kozlowski. I'd like her to come on soon. I would like to talk to her.
She'd be great. She would be. She's got a lot of interesting kind of views of things, and I think she'd be a great guest on this for sure.
But thank you so much for coming on. And
my pleasure. Say hi to Brad for me, and good luck in your research.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll have to do this again soon. Hopefully,
sure. I don't know if I have anything else to say. It's interesting for an hour again.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about.
Well, I don't know if I want to talk to you in 2 weeks. If the Eagles win, I'll be happy to talk. If not, then this never happens.
I'll send my condolences to you. So, all right, folks, that was it. Episode, I think, 28 now. So, all right.